welcome everybody today. Glad you can join us when lots of people are away on holiday. So today we're going to talk about going home, but and we're going to look at it through the lens of Caleb. I know it said Joshua in the instructions, so Dawn and Dave, I apologise slightly to deviate, but it's quite interesting when you see things through the eyes of Caleb. And we're going to think about the journey that he went on as he went to go and join or go and find the promised land. So let's just start with, and you'll recognise this story. This is the story where the 12 spies, or in some other ways it's described as the 12 scouts. So in Numbers 13, the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." Now, there's some really key words within that single verse that are really important for us to understand. So the first thing is, in that verse, God is stating, before they go out to explore, that this is the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. So note, this is the land I am giving to the Israelites. Next point is the people that were selected to go were the leaders. It was the leaders from each ancestral tribe that were selected to go. And then the third point, which you don't see in the verse, but is an interesting point, is where they were sent from. They were sent out from the holy place, which is called Kadesh. And if you rewind back to Genesis, this is the place where Abraham experienced victory over the Amalekites, and now is the place where the Israelites are camped and now being asked by God to go and scout out the promised land, which God has said, I am giving to the Israelites. So have that in mind as we continue the journey. So having understood the instruction that came to go out, there's instructions that God or Moses gave to the 12 leaders. So if we think about this context around Abraham, the backdrop is that God has stated, and it started with Abraham in Genesis 12, the Lord said to Abraham, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land I will show you." Then we go to verses 5 and 6, and it says, Abraham departed as the Lord instructed, underline instructed, and headed for the land of Canaan. And there he set up camp beside the oak of, I might not pronounce this right, Moralai. And at that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. And then in verse 7, it says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, I will give this land to your descendants." So that's the backdrop of the 12 leaders of the ancestral tribes as they are instructed by Moses to go and scout out the land. So then we get to the instructions. I'm just going to do a little anecdote. Most of you will know that there was a group of us that, Christina's mentioned it already, that go in we've done 2 Caminos. And one of the things about the Camino is follow the instructions. And so Christina and I had quite an interesting dilemma when Richard and Dave, who were our navigators, decided not to follow the instructions. So there we go. I'll leave it. I might come back to what happened, but yeah, so follow the instructions. And the instructions are as follows. Go north. See what the land is like. Are they strong? Are they weak? Are they few? Are they many? Do their towns have walls, or are they unprotected? Is the soil fertile or poor? Are there many trees? Bring back samples of the crops you see. So we're thinking at this point, we're set up for success. God has stated, Abraham's proved it, and the instructions seem fairly simple, straightforward, not open to interpretation, so we're good to go. So off they set and go and start exploring the land of Canaan, the promised land, the land that we hear within the verses that is a land flowing with milk and honey. So Google's a great thing. I thought this was quite hilarious when I picked it up to see that you can go, organised by the Holy Land Tour Specialist, the Israel Tour to the land flowing with milk and honey. So we're thinking, yep, we're good with that. Let's make the reservation. We know that people are going to go and have a look at it first. God's given us the instruction. He's given us the assurance. So we're good to go. And then comes the infamous yes, but. How many times in our lives are we shown something? Has it been proven? But we've got the yes, but. So remember who was sent to go and scout and explore the land of Canaan. It wasn't delegates, it wasn't juniors, it wasn't scientists, it was the leaders, the people who were in charge of the 12 tribes. So there's three important things when you think about the role of a leader. So they must have clear goals and objectives. So God gave them a clear role and objective. Go and scout out the land, and you follow the instructions. Second thing about the role of a leader is you need to motivate your followers and provide them with direction. And number three, must support their team members in order for both to succeed. So I thought it was quite interesting that the people sent were the leaders, the 12 guys in charge to follow God's instruction to take the Israelites into the promised land. So as they went to go and explore, remember they had 40 days to do it, so they had plenty of time to experience what the land was like and what it would be like to go and live there and claim the promised land, the land that God said, I will give to the Israelites. So this was the report to Moses when they came back after their 40 days. They said, we entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. And here comes the infamous but. The people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. So, just to help you remember, I thought I would bring my very own giant so that as we talk about what happens when you start to experience giants and how Caleb was responding to a giant. I might need a stagehand if this doesn't go right, and he knows who that is. So I thought I'd bring our very own giant with us. Some of you may recognize this giant. There's two occasions. So you'll know this is Christina and Adrian's son. And I think I might need my stagehand just to come and just give me a little bit of help. But the other place where this giant first appeared was at Fraser and Kirsten's wedding as a surprise part of Callum's best man speech. So you can notice that Callum's a bit taller than me. He's not quite his full height and quite his full strength because this was a few years ago. But for those of us that are smaller, sometimes when you're with tall people, you can feel a little bit intimidated. When I first started work, one of my first jobs, I may have told you this before, but it was with Compaq. And I was working with a team of Dutch people, and Dutch people are infamous for being tall. So here's me, Scottish, they're Dutch, 6'5" on one side and 6'3" on the other, and this was the trio that had to go into different meetings and so on. So I absolutely they had the advantage, actually, where in those days when you did business, you actually got to wear your high heels. Today, that's not the case. I just get to live in my trainers. So giants are an interesting part of this story. So as I was listening to, some of you might have listened to some things from the Bible Project. That's where a couple of guys in the US do little videos and give you a short synopsis of books of the Bible. So I found a podcast that they did around 12 spies, and there's quite a lot of interesting things in that, and a lot of parallels around the story of going to the Promised Land, taking that right back to the pattern of what we see that the spies experienced is actually the pattern that happens back in Genesis. But I'm going to leave that to whet your appetite to go and listen to what they said. But the bit I couldn't resist around the Bible Project commentary is as they were going through some of this, the guy said to the other one, I can't remember, I think it's John and Tim, I think are their names. And the guy that was sort of interviewing or facilitating the podcast just suddenly went to the guy, knock, knock. I knack your heat off if you take my land. I thought I would try that. I'm not great at delivering, but I couldn't resist. And you'll now never forget who Anak is. So, the interesting lesson that we start to see about the spies, that 10 out of the 12 came back and gave this negative report. They saw the benefits, they saw the positives, they saw all of the fantastic, amazing things that were part of the Promised Land, but they also saw giants. So there's an interesting lesson within that, and when I used to do a lot of work with Scripture Union as a student. Before I went to university, I took a year out, and I was part of something called their Reach Out program, where we volunteered for a year and went into schools and did things. So one of the things during that Scripture Union experience, we used to play a game with the kids, and it's quite a good one because you sat all around in a circle, and it was called We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And I don't know whether people remember this one, but you say, we're going on a bear hunt. Do you see what I see? And then then it goes, I'm not scared. Then, you start to see a number of obstacles that are in your way as you make your way on the bear hunt. So there's tall grass, there's a river, there's a mud, there's a cave. And throughout that's the rhyming that goes on, it says, can you go over it? Can you go round it? Can you go through it? Can you go under it? With all the different things, and then you eventually get to the cave, and then what do you see? You see the bear, and they go, uh-oh, and then you've got to run really fast back home, where you go, I'm not scared. So remember that as we start to think about when we start to see giants and what the promise is, and then we'll find out a little bit about Caleb and how he faces giants. So here's the giants that are referred to that are surrounding Canaan. So the descendants of Anak, as we've heard, the Amalekites who lived in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites who all lived in the hill country, and then the Canaanites who lived along the coast of the Mediterranean, along the Jordan Valley. So a little bit of insight into each of those tribes that in essence are the giants that the leaders saw that are preventing them and doubting that God is going to do what God said. So if we take the first one, you guys are on the left, so left-hand corner, Amalekites. So Abraham has previously defeated the Amalekites, and the Israelites have also defeated them at the Battle of Rephidim, where they were led by Joshua. You'll remember the story when Moses has to keep his hands raised, and when he brings his hands down, then the army starts to fail, so he has to keep his arms raised as they battle. And God swore his name and throne would not be complete until Amalek was destroyed. So again, remembering what God has done in the past. Then we come to the Hittites. They are the descendants of Heth. They lived in the promised land, hence God commanding Israel to eradicate them. So again, if you listen to the Bible Project, it's interesting as they take that concept of destroy and eradicate. So sometimes it's not meaning that they were to be wiped out. Sometimes it just means that those people needed to move somewhere else. Then we've got the Jebusites. So they are descended from Noah's son Ham. They were placed under judgment by God for their wickedness and pagan worship. God had told the Israelites to exterminate all of the Amorite tribes when they came into the land. So you need to keep remembering what God's instruction was, the fact that he was giving them this land. Then we've got the Amorites, who were known as fierce warriors. They were destroyed due to the worship of false gods, and this was God's judgment on their pagan culture. And then finally, we have the Canaanites. They were a wicked, idolatrous people, described as large, fierce people, not easily defeated. So therefore, the Israelites would need divine help as they come to tackle the Canaanites. So, scene set, instructions given, assurances given, promises given, but what happens next? We've got another yes, but. This yes, but is a positive. So Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses and said, let's go at once to take the land. We can certainly conquer it. So Joshua and Caleb were the two leaders out of the 12 who saw things differently. And they were the ones that were ultimately to take the Israelites into the promised land. So, in preparing today, you'll see the name Stephen Furtick there. I hadn't come across Stephen Furtick until the previous time when we were talking about water walking. And he has sort of really captured my imagination in terms of some of the ways in which he gives examples and concepts that really help us understand what God is saying and what God is doing. So this next one is quite interesting. So he starts to talk about mirrors. And so when you think about what has happened with the leaders, 10 out of the 12 leaders have started to give a negative report. They've started to sow doubt amongst the people that they can actually enter the promised land. And I thought this quote is part of a sermon that Stephen preached on this very passage. He said to his congregation, just as contagious as faith, so is cynicism. If you have cynical people around you, you will always feel smaller than your challenge, smaller than your giant. So when we look at what happened with the 12 leaders, they said, we can't go in. Think back to what I described around the bear hunt. Do you see what I see? 10 out of 12 saw giants. Joshua and Caleb saw the land that God had promised them. So, as I said, Stephen has used the analogy of our mirror, and he states, our Maker is our mirror, and he who began a good work in me will be faithful to complete it. A mirror shows you the image in reverse, and God knows how your situation will turn out, and he knows how your story ends. So if you're looking in the wrong mirror, you're focused on your mistakes, you're focused on your doubts, then your mirror makes you stay outside of Canaan. You have the strength to go in, not because you're small, but because you see small. And the leaders became a mirror for the Israelites who had a promise from God, but they hadn't possessed it yet. As they looked at giants as their mirror, they saw themselves as grasshoppers. So one of these things is it's really important about who you're around, what you take in, what you look at, who you listen to. So when you see things in a mirror, you can see things in reverse. So if we take the scenario in two ways, so the leader said the giants are too big. God promised us the victory, but I guess we can't go in because of the size of the giants. Or if we see that in reverse, they would have said, God has already promised us the victory, and the giants are so big. If what is coming against me is that great, how much greater must God be? Greater is he that is within me than that is in this world. And the thing that struck me as we go through this, that through what we hear from the leaders, they forget an absolute fundamental as we talk about giants. We saw examples of the giants that they observed, but they forgot who was the giant. God is our giant, and God is all-powerful and overcomes and gives the victory. So when we look at that, the size of my giant is a proof of the size of my God. So if God is letting me experience a challenge this big, God is trying to use your enemies to show you how valuable you are in his kingdom. And the challenge is we can't run around using other people or your situation as your mirror. Because remember, my maker is my mirror. God is my giant. So we come to Caleb, and let's find out a little bit about how Caleb deals with giants. So let's go at once to take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. The land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It's a rich land flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. So I did think when we saw the physique of Caleb and we look at what the guys do, maybe some of the girls too, as they go and work out and they build their muscles and their strength. So Caleb was courageous, and throughout this overall story, he persevered when other leaders became discouraged. And he was invincible in driving out giants, and he was completely devoted to God. And I'm going to come back to this point a little bit later, and vigorous in old age. So we see where we go through seasons of life, but one of the things that is inspiring about Caleb is that he is vigorous in old age and doesn't stop trusting and believing. 6 times it's recorded of Caleb, he has fully followed the Lord. His courage was unfaltering. Giants didn't disturb him, nor those we find out later when the people were doubting after they heard the negative report where they wanted to stone him and Joshua. He followed faithfully, fully, and wholly. And as the Israelites didn't get to enter the promised land in the first time, they had to go back and wander around the desert again for another 40 years. As they did that, they were told that only Joshua and Caleb would enter the promised land, along with the children of the current Israelite tribes. So no adults apart from Joshua and Caleb got to enter. It was the next generation that entered. And I'll paraphrase a little bit, but Caleb said that when I get to the promised land, he wanted a particular mountain to be the land that he inhabited. So his request was answered in response to his faithfulness. So when they got to the land of Canaan, he wanted Hebron. And you'll start to see the significance of that in a minute or two. So Caleb was not content with the average. He never thought in terms of fences or walled cities. It was the heights for Caleb. And although the mountain he wanted was filled with hostile Anakims, he refused defeat and claimed his inheritance. So Caleb was a man of altitudes. He was a man of heights. He was a man that didn't want to settle for less. So when you fast forward in the story, when the Israelites have been wandering the desert at the point where they didn't get to enter the promised land for another 45 years. So we find Caleb back when he is 85 years of age. And Caleb is, with Joshua, going to lead the people to claim the promised land. So at 85, he's going, I've still got this. I've got it. He has got that belief in his faith. He's got his belief in his God, and he is convinced and determined. So the mirror that Caleb was looking at shows faith, not flesh, not his old age, not his physical ability, but faith. And the wilderness can do two things to you. It can kill you, or it can make you stronger. And Caleb said, all that I went through didn't make me bitter. Everything I went through over the last 4.5 decades only served to convince me I've still got it. If God promised and saw me through all this, I don't want to live at the level of feelings. So he says to the people, come on, we can do this. God is on our side. So as they go home, as I mentioned, Caleb said, I want Hebron. And Hebron is a mountaintop. It's 3,000 feet above sea level. And when you watch the Stephen Furtick sort of sermon, he does. I couldn't recreate it, so I wasn't even going to try. But he lands that phrase. It tells about Hebron being 3,000 feet above sea level. So everybody's just thinking that's a fact. Then he gets his Bible and he puts his face in the Bible and says sea level. So we're talking about sea level. And when you settle too low, you settle for what you see. You settle for what people say. You settle for the old template. You settle for the old scripts. You settle for emotions. But when you're seated in heavenly places with Jesus, you have to settle up. You have to get above what you see, how you feel, and what you've been through, and see what God has planned for you, what God has promised to you. Caleb wanted to live where the blessings are, where the battles are. You'll notice those two parallels, the blessings and the battles. And Stephen says you can't have a victory without a battle. So as we remember, giants are a perspective and mirror. God is our maker. Our maker is our mirror. So the level you will settle at is the level that you see yourself. And how many times do we go wrong when we look in the mirror? Do we see a grasshopper when it's a giant? Do we see a failure when it's a lesson? Do we see what's missing because we only see through the filter of fear? And you'll notice in this picture that we've got a sign which we call the way. So when you go on Caminos, well, when we went to Santiago and we went on the last 100 kilometers of that Camino journey, you had those signs and it was called the way. And the signs kept pointing the way. So I thought it was interesting to find that sign pointing towards Hebron, which was Caleb's inheritance within the promised land. So maybe I'll just come back to that story. When you don't follow the directions, when you decide to take a deviation, what do? You introduce doubt within your group, doubt within your followers. The good news was we found our way back to the way in a slight detour, and we returned to the way the instructions were pointing to, the way in which the route was planned. So God said, let's make man in our own image. Our maker is our mirror. And when God said to Moses, I am, he was getting Moses to see, you are as I am. And when God sees you, he sees himself. And if he is in you, he is more than the world against you. So as we reflect on that, Timothy's just going to play the last part of what Stephen Furtick did as he preached this sermon to the church, to the Elevation Church. I just want you to listen to his sort of closing comments, and then we'll just finish in prayer.